Well, good evening everybody, and welcome to this Words of Hope question and answer session with Edwin Michael. It's great to have you here with us, and if you just actually came across this question and answer session, you're wondering what on earth it is, we've just finished the second of 5 special broadcasts by the Elim Church in Ireland, where we're looking to speak life into the crisis that is currently across the world at the moment because of the COVID-19 virus. And Edwin has just shared this evening, we're going to go into a question and answer time with him. But if you haven't seen his broadcast, we thoroughly recommend it to you. And it'll take about 8 minutes to watch it, and you will be blessed through what he says. But we're delighted that you're here. And maybe if you've been with us the whole way through and you still haven't shared this broadcast onto your personal Facebook page, why not take a second and just do that now? Because it just helps us get the message out far and wide of what we're trying to share and the hope that we're trying to bring to people. So Edwin, it's great to have you here with us tonight. Thank you very much for your broadcast. And I just thought before we go into the questions, it would be nice if you could just, for maybe folk who are outside of Elim and might not know, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family and your ministry role.
Okay, Pip, great to be sharing in the question and answer session tonight. I'm married to Margaret. We've been married for 37 years this coming September. We have had 3 children. Laura is married to Scott, and she lives and works here in Northern Ireland. Ryan lives and works in Manchester, and he's in a relationship with a lovely girl called Sophie. We did have a 3rd child, actually, our first child, who died just a few days after birth, but that's a long time ago. But we do have had 3 children. I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I've been in ministry for 34 of those years. A larger part of that has been pastoral work in local churches, and then the last 9 years as the superintendent of the Elim churches here in Ireland.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Edwin. And obviously we've put this series together to try and speak hope into the crisis, but it is a crisis, and we've all watched it unfold over the last few months, and it has made an impact right across the globe. And we had that grim statistic earlier in the week that we saw in the news that the UK has now passed 30,000 people who have died as a result of COVID-19. What are your reflections at the minute, Edwin, as you hear statistics like that and see what's happening?
Yeah, I guess, Pip, I'm pretty much like everybody else. We've all been in a state of kind of shock in some ways. You know, over and over again, I hear people saying to me, could you have believed 6 months ago that we would be sitting in this situation and lockdown in this country? And you have to say absolutely no way that we could ever have anticipated something like that. And as we see this thing roll around the globe, we see the fear, we see the statistics coming in day after day. It's really sad. I also find at times, because of the busyness of life still in church work, that it can be a little bit surreal. You know, you get busy, and you can almost forget sometimes for a few hours that this is happening. And then you have these little moments of recalibration where you suddenly think, no, this is real. This is going on. You see the effects of it, and you see the sorrow. It's really difficult. One other thing that I've reflected on lately, I personally have found it really strange over the recent period of good weather. When I look out my window, I'm looking across open fields, and everything seems to be bursting into life. And what I see out the window doesn't match what I'm seeing on screen. And then when you hear the reports, it's just a stark reminder of the fact that this is real, where we're really at.
Yeah, and the reports are stark. And you made mention in your interview or your presentation, about too much information can be a negative thing in some ways. And I know people who have stopped watching the news for the very reason that it just seems to get them down, and it has a very negative impact upon them. I would be the opposite. I'm always watching the news and trying to take everything in. How do you find that balance? Because obviously, as a minister of the gospel, Karl Barth, the famous theologian, said, we should have the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other, and we should be totally aware of what is going on around us in our culture and how the Bible speaks into that. How have you found it in terms of finding a balance of too much information is a negative thing, but also we need to be aware of reality?
Absolutely, Pip. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be somebody who would, advocate the idea of sort of not believing in this pandemic or anything like that, or just choosing to ignore it. And anyway, I do really believe we need to be informed. A lot of people are facing a lot of huge issues about their health, their safety, their future. We need to be informed about the pandemic for sure. But in my little talk, I was talking a little bit about information, but I think people are searching for information. But it's really important that we get reliable information. That's the thing. I don't know if you're like me. I've seen like a multitude, a host of these sort of epidemiologists springing up who have become sort of professional in the field in the last 3 weeks, almost, it appears. May never have looked at the subject before. And I think there's some information out there which, we need to be careful of, some of the conspiracy theories and stuff like that, to say that, that unscrupulous people wouldn't take advantage of this situation, or governments even for that. I don't know, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So people need information. We need to be informed, but we need to be reliably informed. And I think just there's a danger sometimes in lockdown that, we can sort of almost become information addicts. We can just go from the one report to the next report to the next report, and we have a world of information on our phones, all the information we need, and it can become that we just get too much overload information. And I feel like information, it's like our diet. We need it. We need to be informed. We need reliable information, but we need the right amounts of it, particularly in lockdown, where there's all kinds of mental health issues and stuff that come out of the isolation factor. So we need information, but we need to be careful of too much negative information, or information that maybe isn't well founded or credible.
Yes, and you mentioned there about people searching for reliable information, and you also mentioned in your presentation about the people are searching for truth. And I thought that was a very interesting point that you brought across in terms of reliability. Reality, is all part of the pursuit of truth, very much so. And if we want to understand reality, people are searching for truth. So what you're saying there is interesting, but are you being a bit over optimistic when you're saying that people are searching for truth? Others might disagree with that. Others might say we're living in a post-truth world. Edwin, I'm just wondering, do you genuinely believe that COVID-19 is making people or inspiring people to think about a higher meaning, a higher purpose, or even God?
Absolutely, Pip. I mean, people are searching for information on the virus and the current season. That's one aspect. But as I was saying, this pandemic has raised the bigger issues, the bigger questions, and there is no doubt that people are searching for some sort of security and for some sort of truth in the situation. And the statistics speak for themselves. Even in our own churches that have gone online, all of the guys are recording that more people are dropping into or listening to services or joining in prayer times than ever would have come to their church services. That's one thing. But some of the major online ministries around the world are reporting that they've had huge spikes in the number of people who are coming in, people who are contacting them with questions, and many people actually come into relationship with God, with the Lord, through it. So that's a global reality, and the statistics actually prove that. So there's a deeper, meaningful thing that people are looking for, and that's part of the fact that the Bible says we're made in the image of God, and because we're made in the image of God, even though that image has become flawed or defaced in a sense because of a broken relationship with God, yet that internal, deeper part never changes. There's a searching for security, there's a searching for understanding, there's a searching for answers to the deeper questions. There is no doubt about that.
Absolutely. But what is it you think about it is about a disaster that makes people search for God?
Yeah, well, at a time like this, in what we say in normal times, in the 21st century world, we we live as if we have it all nailed down. It's almost as if we're masters of our own destiny. We have technology, we can do so many things. And in that situation, there can come almost a sense of invulnerability that we can't touch. We're capable of handling absolutely anything. Then a disaster comes along, or in this case, this pandemic, and suddenly we come face to face with just how fragile we really are, how vulnerable we really are. As I was saying in my talk, as we live out our life on planet Earth, and then that raises the big questions about life and about death and about God, because we just become aware that we are not masters of our own destiny, that we cannot control everything, and we begin to look for other answers in that season and in that time.
Yeah, and we've seen it throughout history, haven't we? The 9/11 disaster that took place, all of a sudden, that the next Sunday, churches were full right across the United States of America, but not so full now. And there is something in that moment that people turn, but it's maybe not always the most genuine thing. But it's important to give balance to Edwin as well, and realize that people also turn away from God in times of disaster, and you recognize that.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. Suffering and whenever things like this happen in the world will divide people. People will go in one of two directions. Some people will search for God. Other people will become more closed off to God. They will blame God. But I generally find with that category of people, very often, sadly, it flows out of just not understanding how our world functions. We live in a world that is fractured. It's a world that is not functioning as God originally intended it to. And sometimes if we don't come at situations like this from a biblical perspective, then we can begin to blame God. We can begin to accuse God. Why is God doing this to me? And in actual fact, at a time like this, God's not the enemy. I mean, I would agree with the speaker from last week about, did God send this pandemic? No. Does he work in it and through it? Absolutely, he does. But in this situation, God's not the enemy. A relationship with God is the answer. And there's no doubt about that. But so when we turn against God, it's usually coming from that place of we believe God is doing this to us. But when we understand the biblical view of the world that we live in, we can begin to see God through a completely different lens. We begin to see God as the answer, not the problem.
Yeah, and obviously that was one of the key points you made in your presentation, was about the Bible, the authority of the Bible, and how it can speak into this current situation. But not everybody has that biblical perspective, Edwin. And you were saying about how the Bible is it's the world's most unique book. It doesn't have any like or equal or rival. And I was just wondering how you would speak to people who maybe disagree with that. There are lots of intelligent people out there who have written religious literature and philosophy and all different things like that, who would maybe dismiss the Bible as truth. Obviously, as Christians, we believe it is truth, but why do you believe it is so unique across the board?
Yeah, look, I understand there are many people who would dismiss the Bible. Sadly, a lot of people dismiss the Bible out of hand without ever taking a real serious look there. But if you look at the credentials of the Bible, I believe it's absolutely unique. We wouldn't have time to break it all down here, other than to give maybe a few points that I have in my mind about it. See, the Bible's not just a book. It's like a mini library. It's a volume of a series of books in one volume. And when we look at how that book's constructed, if you take the characteristics of the Bible, it shows the uniqueness. Consider some of these things just for a moment. The Bible is written not by one author, but by probably 35 to 40 different authors over a period of 1,400 years. Some of them never met each other, lived on 3 different continents. The Bible's written in 3 different languages. They came from all different walks of life. Some of them wrote in times of war. Some of them wrote in times of peace. And they wrote on all sorts of controversial subjects. things like right and wrong, morality, life, death, eternity. Yet, when we bring all their writings together into this one volume, they don't disagree with each other on these major moral or eternal issues. It's remarkable, it really is. And there's one consistent theme that flows right through the Bible, all the way from Genesis right through to Revelations, the story of the love of God and the grace of God for his world. So the Bible's absolutely unique in its construction. If we asked 3 people who are alive right now on the earth to write on some of these subjects, and we brought their writings together, we could hardly get agreement on 10% of it probably. But here are these authors spread out over 14 centuries, and yet they bring together this consistent theme when their writings are brought together. The Bible's unique in a host of ways. It's unique in the way it's been preserved. No other book in history has been so attacked as the Bible. Going back through history, empires, emperors, leaders have tried to ban it and completely rid the world of it. But here we are, many of those empires have come and gone, and the Bible is still with us. It's unique in its circulation. It remains the world's best-selling book. In any given month, perhaps not, something comes out that grabs the attention of people. But overall, the Guinness Book of Records tells us it's still the world's best-selling book. You know, this would take a whole study. But what I'm trying to appeal to people to say, don't dismiss the Bible lightly. It's unique in a couple of other ways, and then we'll move on to something else. But I love this stuff. You know, the Bible's unique in its prophetic predictions. Things that are recorded in the Bible that would happen centuries before they happen, like the birth, the life, the death of Jesus, predicted thousands of years and centuries before, described in detail and fulfilled exactly in the person of Jesus Christ. A host of other things in the Bible that were predicted in advance have already come to pass, and many more which will. And one last area, the Bible is unique in its influence. No other book has so influenced our world. And I know in our 21st century where you've talked about a post-truth or a post-Christian world, we don't readily acknowledge that. But much of the structure of society, many of the good things that we enjoy, came into being and were advanced in the past by people who were deeply influenced by the Bible. Things like our law system, things like the national health and caring for people, and a whole range of things that we enjoy today come out of the influence of the Bible on past societies, and the influence of the Bible on people who were deeply moved to do something about some of these issues in bygone days. So we enjoy them, but we've now forgotten the origins of them or what influenced them into being.
Well, if the Bible is so unique, Edwin, it's going to speak into the greatest moments and struggles of our lives. So let's boil it down here. And there is much suffering in the world at the moment as a result of COVID-19 and as a result of many, many other things. And people will always turn and they will ask, well, like, how does this all good and all loving God not step in to stop all the suffering that is going on? I guess suffering is a reality. We can't avoid that. So maybe the question that people might like to ask is, well, what does the Bible say? Does it help us see that we can actually trust God in our suffering? Is there something that you can say to that?
Absolutely, Pip. The Bible shows us that God is the answer in our times of suffering, and he can be absolutely trusted. I mentioned earlier about the fact that we live in a world that is fractured. It's not the way that God intended it to be. And in this time, the Bible shows us that suffering is a reality. Christians don't deny that, not for a moment. And Christians are not immune from suffering. But what the Bible gives us is a unique answer to our sufferings, in that the God who created the world has stepped into that world in human form in the person of Jesus. Jesus has come into our world, and he has tasted firsthand of that suffering. And in this period of time, the Bible promises us that if we reach out to God, that God, he doesn't promise to remove our suffering, but what he promises to do is to presence himself with us right in our suffering. And he promises us, if we're in relationship with him, that he will give out to us all the resources that we need to go through that particular period. But of course, the Bible also points us to a day, ultimately, when God will deal with all suffering. The Bible tells us about an eternal state where God will wipe away the tears from every eye. There will be no more sorrow. There will be no more pain. There will be no more death. There will be no more parting. So the Bible points us to God. And so many people have found the presence of God, even in the midst of suffering, to be so reliable, to really carry them through those moments and those times. And that's the answer that the Bible gives to suffering at this particular time.
Yeah, there will be still many people who are watching this, who are struggling and are wondering where God is. Why does God not help people who have relatives who have died as a result of this virus, or who are tragically or terribly ill, people who have lost their jobs, people who are worried about the future? And whilst from a faith perspective we can look and say, but the future hope, it speaks hope in their present as wonder, people are still asking, where is God? Why does God not help me in my situation right here and right now? Do you think God is trying to say something to me? We don't believe God has sent this virus at all, but is God trying to say something to us in the suffering that there is? C.S. Lewis, who God whispers to us in our pleasures, he speaks to our conscience, but he shouts to us in our pain. It's like his megaphone to the world. Is God trying to say something to a suffering world at this time? And if so, what might that be?
Absolutely. At a time like this, I said earlier about how we are made aware, keenly aware of how fragile, how vulnerable we really are in our world. And through something like this, God is calling to us. He's making us aware of our need. He wants to let the reality of that drop into every one of our lives. And he's trying to show us the absolute need of this relationship with him, this relationship which can equip us to cope with anything that life brings at us, not just a pandemic like this, but there are many other issues of suffering in life that were there before COVID-19 and will be there after it. And God is shouting to the world in this season, in this moment, inviting them to come into this meaningful relationship with him where they can find the strength that they need. Now, does God make all our problems go away instantly? Absolutely not. But it's this invitation into this journey, into this relationship with God that can be so meaningful. God is awakening our world, I believe, to the need of that relationship.
Yeah, do you think resurrection speaks hope into the world today? That truth that we believe Jesus rose from the dead, do you think that has anything to speak hope today?
Yeah, the resurrection is the great hope of the Christian faith. And in this current pandemic, the big thing that we are faced with ultimately is the possibility of death. But sometimes we need to step back from that and realize that death has always been a reality. We are just mortal beings. The wonderful thing about the message of the gospel is that God came in human form. Jesus came, a real man. He lived and he died. But then he stepped back out of death. He defeated death. And he promises that victory over death to all who will follow him. And that's why resurrection is so important, because through the resurrection, God is saying to us that death doesn't have even the final say in our lives. Jesus has already defeated death, already conquered death, and he promises that victory to all of his followers. The Bible speaks of the resurrection as giving a living and absolutely vibrant hope to us in all seasons of life, but particularly at a time like this. And it's the great hope of the Christian faith. In the Old Testament, whenever the nations used to bring in their harvest, they would offer the first of that harvest up to God, give thanks to God for his blessing on the land. And it was called the offering of first fruits. And actually, the Bible describes Jesus like that, like a first offering. He's the first resurrection from the dead. But afterwards, the Bible speaks about all of his followers having victory over death and rising again in the same way that he did. So it's huge in the Christian faith. It's the great hope of the Christian faith, and it's based on an historical fact, a reality.
Yeah, and just a couple of personal questions, maybe in terms of your experience, your journey with God, to try and earth some of this for what your experience has been, Edwin. Resurrection, the hope of the future, knowing where we are going. Does that ever are you never afraid? Do you ever fear in this current crisis? Are you void of fear, Edwin?
No, absolutely not. I'm not superhuman, and Christians don't claim to be superhuman. We're affected by all of the things that everyone is affected in this life, affected with in this life, and even this current crisis. And the Christian life, when we come into this relationship with God that I've spoken so much about, it doesn't mean that we automatically have all of these issues dealt with. We're never afraid again. We're never anxious again. And coming into this relationship is both an event and a process. We come into this relationship at a moment in time, but it also brings us into a process where we learn to live and trust, increasingly learn to trust God. And the more we learn to trust God, the more we realize how faithful he is, then the more these other things begin to melt away in our life, because the things that would make us anxious, the things that would bring fear, the more we learn how faithful God is, then the more those things don't control and they don't have a huge hold over our life. Do I still get anxious sometimes? Absolutely. Are there things that sometimes makes us afraid? But then we pause and we bring that back and we remember how faithful God is to us, and those things begin to be dealt with. They begin to subside in our life, and the life of faith and trust really takes over. And so it's a process of learning to grow further and further and further in our trust with God.
Yeah, brilliant. And you've taken quite a lot of really heavy, big questions tonight, Edwin, and we appreciate you doing that. I could talk to you a lot longer about many of the issues, and sometimes we feel that we're just skimming the surface with some of these things. But just to finish, what does having a relationship with God mean to you? And what would you say to somebody who is watching this broadcast who is not yet a Christian?
Having a relationship with God, it has become everything to me, Pip. It really has. I said I've been a Christian for over 40 years, but I wasn't always a Christian. I lived my life right through into my late teenage years with no thought for God whatsoever. Just doing anything that I wanted to do, living any way I basically wanted to live. At a very young age, I used to sing around pubs and clubs, and I thought I knew what life was all about. I knew where I was going and what was important and how to really live life. Then God began to break in on our whole family circle, and I got caught up in that, and God broke into my life, and that totally changed everything. It totally transformed everything in me. And I suddenly became aware of this whole new dimension of life, this spiritual dimension of life that I hadn't even realized was there before. And then I suddenly began to realize that I thought I was really living before that. But then I began to realize what life was really all about, with this whole extra dimension of relationship with God, the reality of his presence and his power in my life. I just became aware of all of that. And that has been the case. That has never changed. The excitement of that has never changed over 40 years. Do I still have problems? Absolutely. Do I still struggle with things? Yes, like everybody else. But that reality in my life has directed my life for all of those years. God has been very faithful. God has blessed. So my relationship with God is everything to me. And I would say to anyone who is out there, who is considering some of the big questions at this time and really thinking about these things. Jesus said something. He said, whoever comes to me, I won't turn them away. And it's very interesting at this moment. Church buildings are closed. But I would say to people out there, you don't need a church building to get into a relationship with God. You might not even be able to get access to a minister. Believe it or not, you don't need a minister to bring you into this relationship with God. You can simply call on God. You can pray. Just talk to God. You can invite him to come into your life. You can invite him to forgive you and bring you into this relationship with him. But even if you're not prepared to take that step, what I would say would be is bring your questions to God. Bring your ponderings to God. If you're angry at God, God's able to take that stuff. He's not troubled by us bringing that stuff to him. So I would encourage people to talk to God, bring their questions, but beyond the questions, he's inviting you into this experience with him, into this relationship with him, and he's waiting for you to ask him to come in. And when you do, just like it happened to me over 40 years ago, didn't mean to get emotional, but it's real, really is. And if people invite the Lord in, they will discover that Jesus really is who he claims to be. He really rose from the dead. He's alive, and his presence can be real in your life. I close with this thought on this question anyway, to say that Jesus said he has come to give us life and life overflowing. And when we come into this relationship with God, eternal life has already started within us. We think of eternal life in terms of duration, the length, it's never going to end. But eternal life's not just the duration, it's a different quality of life that God brings us into, this spiritual dimension of knowing him and journeying through life with him. And that's available to anyone who will reach out and ask the Lord to come in.
Brilliant, Edwin. And it is real, it is emotional, and it means everything to us. So thank you for being vulnerable and just sharing your heart with us tonight. That has been so helpful. And if you are watching this broadcast and you are wondering about becoming a Christian, why you need to become a Christian, or indeed how you become a Christian, we would encourage you to visit the Elim Church Ireland website and follow the link that's on the screen at the moment. And there are a series of short videos there that can help answer some of the questions that you have. Or, as we said in the video at the start, if you would like to find out more about Elim Ireland, a church that's close to you, how you can journey with us, or we can journey with you and be more support to you as well, why not email us info@elimchurchireland.com, and we'll be only too glad to get back to you and to help you. And Edwin, we just want to say a massive thank you to you for your time investment and your presentation, but also in coming into the firing line and answering all of the difficult questions that you've taken tonight. This is a really important thing for us as a movement to be able to do, and we just want to say that we appreciate your leadership and how you are helping us as a movement come into this space where we are answering the tough questions, and we're seeking to bring the hope of the gospel into this world in a real way, dealing with real situations and how Jesus can make a difference in people's lives. So thank you so much for everything that you've given us tonight. And also, we would love to invite you to come to Words of Hope next Sunday night. Pastor John McAvoy will be speaking, and he'll be addressing another topic that questions that people are asking in this season, and we would love to have you back for that. So thank you for being with us tonight, and may God bless you.